CNN English Express special interview, in which CNN foreign correspondent Matt Rivers talks about the Chinese public's perceptions of U.S.-China relations and the challenges of reporting from China and other parts of the world. There are many sources of friction between China and the United States: rivalry in trade and technology, human rights issues, Beijing's moves to gain more control in Hong Kong, territorial disputes, and so on. What's the perception of East Asia-related issues among the general public in America? And to what extent do you think ordinary Chinese people are aware of these issues?
Especially given President Trump's focus on the U.S.-China relationship, I think that has been more in the American public's mind now than it has been for years and years and years. So I think your average American is absolutely paying attention to more news out of China. But I also think that as a result of that, you are going to see more American public interest in some of those other issues you mentioned, like American and Chinese military interactions in the South China Sea, human rights abuses going on in Xinjiang in Western China right now. How China interacts and spreads its influence in places like the Philippines. With the Chinese public, it's very difficult to gauge. Generally speaking, the Chinese public only gets their news from Chinese state media. So they don't get free and fair independent reporting. They get government propaganda fed to them by the Communist Party. And there's no good public opinion polling in China. So you can ask, polling companies in the United States, what do you think about China? And you can get a decent cross-section of society where you might be able to get an answer from that. In China, that doesn't exist. With all of that said, though, anecdotally speaking, talking to people in different parts of China, talking to my Chinese colleagues, I think people are paying attention to the trade war. I think they are concerned that it might affect their earning power, their income. You have, state media propagandists who are basically saying that this trade war is it's a point of national pride. It's China standing up to the imperial aggressor. So I think the average perception of America amongst the Chinese public right now is going to be more informed about the trade war.
What kind of influence or pressure have you felt from the Chinese authorities during your news gathering activities in China?
They don't influence our reporting in terms of affecting what we print. We print and report the truth as we see it, and the Chinese government doesn't like that. But we don't take that into account whether they like it or not. The important thing is to tell the truth. However, they do consistently try and influence us. And you saw in our reporting, we were harassed, we were threatened with arrest, we were followed 24/7 by people who wouldn't identify themselves. We were followed in cars. We were lied to consistently by officials on the ground in Xinjiang. It shows you the hypocrisy of China's government on this particular issue when they say that they have nothing to hide about what's going on in Xinjiang, but then they do everything they can to try and prevent you from seeing what's going on in Xinjiang. So you can't really square that circle. So they try and influence us. And to be fair, there are other governments around the world that would do the same thing. We saw that happen in Myanmar as well. So they try, but ultimately we can't let that affect what we do, because then we're not telling our viewers the whole truth, and then that kills the whole purpose of our job.
You've covered stories in various Asian countries, and I imagine there are many differences between the Western culture you were raised in and Eastern cultures in general. What would you say is the value or significance of that kind of journey across cultural barriers and into different cultural settings?
I think that when you're a foreign correspondent, someone who is raised in a culture different than where you're reporting, I think the first thing you need to do is listen and not assume that you know how things work in some place that you've never been. And that's why having the staff that we do across all these different countries, I work with Chinese staff. When I come to Japan, we've got 2 producers in Japan who can teach me things that I wouldn't have otherwise known, and they kind of give me that guidance. When we go to Myanmar, we hire a Burmese fixer who is local on the ground, who can guide us in these areas. We bring a certain Western perspective, which I think is good because we can help translate what's happening to a Western audience, because we know how a Western audience thinks. But I think when you're a foreign correspondent, the best thing you can do is make sure that you have people that you can work with and rely on who know these cultures that you don't.
Basic training number 1.
This interview is with Matt Rivers, who researched about how Chinese media report themselves in China, and general opinions and impression towards Chinese people about Americans. He mentioned that Chinese governments are trying to hide as much information as possible and towards the Chinese people in the nation, even though they say they are trying to divulge all the information. And the Chinese government tried to hide the information in order to control the Chinese people and the nation itself. But actually, and also when Matt Rivers news group tried to interview or try to discover the hidden information itself, they harass them, or they always chase the Matt Rivers while they don't identify themselves. That's one thing he talked about. And another thing is what is another thing? Oh yeah, Chinese government is keen, and Chinese government cares too much about the trade war against America, Western countries. They assume that trade war will happen. It's very difficult to gauge Chinese potential. lesson skills.